Greetings and welcome back to Doctor Who Revisited, where I go through every single episode of Doctor Who from 1963 all the way to 2022 and review them. And now we are starting off a brand new season, Season 9 to be specific. It's hard to believe we're already on Season 9, but this season opener is a massive banger in my opinion. The Day of the Daleks. First of all, for clarification, for this rewatch specifically, I watched the special edition Day of the Daleks with the updated effects, the new visuals, and most importantly, Nicholas Briggs voicing the Daleks, because let me tell you, I've watched the original broadcast version for the first 2 times I watched this serial, and boy oh boy, the Nicholas Briggs interpretation of the Daleks adds so much. No shade on anyone, but I mean the way the Daleks sounded in the original is horrible. And I'm sorry to say this, but and I'm not just saying it just because it's Nicholas Briggs, the iconic legendary voice of the Daleks. It's just the original voice is just so bad it really takes you out of it.
Whoever is operating the time machine is an enemy of the Daleks. All enemies of the Daleks must be destroyed. Exterminate them! Exterminate them! Exterminate them!
But having said that, it's another really good episode. It's another one of those examples of how you can take the Doctor out of his usual time and place without having him use the TARDIS too much. And I love how the writers kept getting around that issue over and over. And first of all, one negative I could say about it is this opens in a very interesting way with the Doctor and Joe meeting their future selves because of some timey-wimey stuff happening with the TARDIS console. And it's never actually brought up. I mean, it might get referenced later in the story, but you don't actually get to see or learn what happened that caused this timey-wimey meeting between the Doctor and Joe and their future selves. But it's another one of those smaller scenes that just show us the dangers of time travel and what could possibly happen when the TARDIS is messed with, particularly when the Doctor has all of his knowledge of the TARDIS taken from him by the Time Lords. So, yeah, that's a big no-no, Doctor. Why do you keep tampering with this machine? But all that being said, now, the actual story itself of the Dalek occupation of Earth, which, I gotta say, it really does help a lot that in the special edition you actually get to see some of the devastation that happened during the Dalek occupation. Of course, this is sort of an alternate timeline and a sort of parallel to the Dalek invasion of Earth from the William Hartnell era. I'm still not 100% sure. Some sources say different things, but I'm not sure if it's an alternate timeline to the William Hartnell story, or is it a little bit before that? And if it is before that, why weren't the Ogrons in the Dalek invasion of Earth? Obviously, we all know the answer is pretty obvious for that one, but how do you explain that retroactively? And of course, the idea that the leading Dalek is actually the gold Dalek, and the black Daleks, or rather the grayish Daleks, are the underlings, as opposed to in the original William Hartnell with the silver dome Daleks being the underlings and the black Dalek being the leader. It kind of gets messy, so I think the easiest explanation would be that it's a alternate timeline where the occupation never actually ended and was successful, and in a way it sort of answers the question of how the occupation started with the murder of the important politician that we see early in the episode, and we see him again in the final part of the episode. And it's another example of the bootstrap paradox, where the civil unrest and the civil war which led to the Dalek invasion of Earth and then subsequently the Dalek occupation of Earth, subjugation of Earth, happened because this politician and all the other world leaders were murdered. So these people went back in time to try to prevent that, but in doing so, they actually created the event that started the invasion in the first place. So it's a never-ending loop, which again shows us the dangers of time travel, which is how it's relevant to that moment we see earlier in the episode with Joe and the Doctor from the future. And I just love that, and I love that, of course, the Doctor is, as per usual, the only one smart enough to realize what's happening, and so he undoes the whole thing by evacuating all the politicians and the world leaders away from that guy's mansion and letting the guy blow himself out, because, that's what happened in history, and that was basically the only way they could stop the Daleks, the invading Dalek forces. But other than that, I think, first of all, the location is really, really good. I love the mansion and all the different rooms that we get to see explored there. First of all, the very pastoral landscape there, and the area with the lake, which I'm pretty sure that's where they found the abandoned Dalek casing. You probably know what I'm talking about. There's this picture of like an old Dalek found in a lake somewhere, which, judging by the design, I'm guessing that's the Dalek that was used in this episode. I find it hard to believe that it's the same Dalek that was seen rising from the Thames in the Dalek invasion of Earth. It makes a bit more sense if it was that, the Daleks from this story specific, but I guess we find, the answer where that Dalek came from, right? In any case, I think the look and feel of the factories, and let's just call it what it is, the Dalek concentration camps in the future, I think those look really, really good. The eeriness, and they really do convey the feeling of desperation that must have happened to those people during the Dalek occupation and the Dalek subjugation of that time. And again, it's always going back into the core Dalek ideas of being inspired by the Nazis. Like, Nazi imagery is always a major big thing in Dalek lore. So I love that they keep going back into this well. And then, you know what? Some might disagree, but I personally never get tired of it. Like, give me all the Dalek parallels to Nazism. Give me them all day long. I love it whenever they depict them. That's why Dalek Invasion of Earth is one of my favorite Dalek stories of all time, because it just highlights how similar these things are, and how easily and how quickly we as a species can devolve back into that mindset. And it's important that we learn from our own history as well as the fictionalized history of shows like Doctor Who and shows that like that other show where the Nazis won, that I can't remember the name of at the moment. But yeah, it's important that we learn from these fictionalized versions of history, so that our real history does not repeat itself. But enough of that tangent for a bit. The actual people serving with the Daleks, I think they were used I think they were done to perfection. The people fighting against the Daleks, I think, are really, really good. I like these anti-Dalek rebels, essentially, which sort of, in a way, I guess it's kind of a precursor to the Galactic Rebellion seen in Star Wars: A New Hope a few years after this episode. The episode also is the debut of the Ogrons. I think the Ogrons were a good idea in concept. I think, in a way, that the whole reason for why they created the Ogrons in Doctor Who in the first place was they needed someone to be like the Daleks' henchmen. Like, they basically created this species to be henchmen for the Daleks, and we do see them a couple of times later on in both the TV show and expanded media. So I like the idea of creating a race specifically for the Daleks, big, strong, and powerful enough and smart enough to operate Dalek machinery and weapons, but not at all smart enough to rise up against the Daleks. I think that was a really good idea in concept. The execution, I think, is also pretty well. I mean, they're basically just giant gorillas, and this is interesting because it's around the same time of the Planet of the Apes movies, when they were in their, no pun intended, their apex. So it's hard not to view the similarities between the apes from those movies and the Ogrons, but yeah, it's fine. I mean, even the costumes look very similar, so I really can't complain too much about that because I love those 5 original Ape movies. Yes, even the second one, and yes, even the fifth one. As far as the Doctor and Joe, I like their interaction in this episode. I do kind of take a little bit of an issue with how Joe was accidentally sent to the future and immediately started trusting the guy we already know as the audience is working with the Daleks. But in a way, that's Joe's entire thing, in a way, because she's a very trusting person. She wants to believe the best in humanity, the best in anybody, so it makes sense that she would trust him immediately right away. But, this being her second season with the Doctor, you'd think she'd slightly wisen up to that sort of way of thinking and start to get a slight less trustful of the first person she meets. But I mean, you know what? It really doesn't matter. It happens very, very briefly. When eventually the Doctor shows up and the truth is revealed, and more importantly, you learn about the guy that he's not just blindly following the Daleks, just like all great villains or great villain henchmen. He has an agenda all on his own, and we eventually do get to see him turn on the Daleks and help save the world by way of doing so, which results in his extermination. But we also get to learn a little more about the network of people and how everyone have their own agendas, and they would betray the closest person to them to get ahead in life and to get closer to the Daleks, to no avail, of course, because eventually we all know from watching the show that the Dalek occupation eventually ends with the William Hartnell incarnation. But again, this being a sort of alternate timeline, is that really the same case? I mean, with the politicians and the world leaders not dying in the explosion in the mansion, does that occupation actually happen? Or doesn't it? Maybe because they didn't blow up in the mansion, this sort of set history on the right track, where the Dalek invasion did happen eventually, but not necessarily the way it happened in this episode. Wibbly wobbly timey wimey. Again, going back into what I said previously in this review, is I love that the explosion still happens. The guy does eventually sacrifice himself blowing up the mansion, but he's taking out the Daleks with him, and that's how, first of all, how Unit wins the fight against the Daleks, because the invading Daleks come through the portal from the future and start really wrecking stuff up and start really wreaking havoc on the Unit forces there. And this is another case of how the special edition really does help a lot, because for budgetary constraints, there was only like 3 or 4 Daleks constructed for this story originally in its original run, and with the benefit of editing and that was done with the special editions, you get to see more Daleks in this scenario, and it really does feel like a desperate battle between the Unit forces and the invading Daleks and Orgrons. It really does feel like a tough battle that the Unit guys eventually win, as opposed to just a minor skirmish between all of Unit's forces and just 3 Daleks and a couple of Ogrons. So yeah, I really like how they made the battle feel more like a battle. And here's, I guess, another nitpick. I guess they added some of the audio, some sound effects of guns and some war sound effects playing in the background in this special edition, which for some reason continues after the Daleks were gone, after they were blown up. Like, if you listen to the special editions, after the mansion blows up, taking the Daleks with them, it's alluded to that there are still some Ogrons and maybe even a couple more Daleks hanging around the area, and you can still hear gunfire, you can still hear the Unit people fighting. And it's like, while the Doctor is talking, and that's how the episode ends. So, I don't know. I didn't quite like that. It kind of feels like the battle is still going on, but we're moving on to the next episode, like nothing even happened. Like, they didn't really resolve that battle with the Daleks and the Ogrons. So, That's really kind of the biggest nitpick I can add onto this special edition. And again, it's been a while since I've seen the original. I don't necessarily remember if those sounds of gunfire and battle were in the original version, but that's, I guess, but if it was, that would have been a good time to remove them in the special editions. And the fact that if they were, and the fact that they kept them, that's also not good. But it's such a minor thing, it happens right at the final few seconds of the episode, so I can't really complain too much about that. And another minor nitpick is not a lot of a Brigadier. We get to see a lot of Benton and Yates in this episode, but not quite as much as I would have liked. And I do love that this was the introduction of the famous line, RHIP, rank has its privileges, and I love how Yates uses it on Benton. Kind of makes him look like a douche, but in a way it's a great depiction of the military type camaraderie that the unit years are famous for. So, you know what, it's fun and it's funny, and it's just a really fun character quirk that was introduced in this episode. But that is about it for Day of the Daleks, not to be confused with Day of the Doctor. That's a completely different story. But yeah, I really like this episode. I think it's a great way to start season 9. A great return to form with the Daleks, because of course Daleks have pretty much been a no-show for like 4 or 5 seasons now, because Terry Nation tried to do his own thing with the Daleks for a bit and realized that it didn't work, so he allowed the BBC to use the Daleks again. Didn't write this episode, I believe it, but yeah, it's great. It's always fun to see the Daleks again, and we are going to see the Daleks again in the next season as well, but that is a story for another time. So let me know what you all think about this Dalek story, and I will see you next time. Also, let me know which one you prefer. Do you prefer the original, or do you actually prefer this special edition? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you some other time. So until the next one, everybody, goodbye. Hi there! Thank you for watching the video, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. I'll see you next time!